guys want to hear something cool about the book of Habakkuk? And specifically how the book of Habakkuk was used in communities after its original audience? Now, first of all, we need to even put some asterisks or quotation marks around the original audience because it's sort of speculative. On Sunday, I tried to make a case for a potential hypothetical historical setting for this book, namely the situation in which these world powers are vying for supreme authority. We have the decline of the Assyrian Empire after the death of Ashurbanipal, and after that moment in 627, things become pretty sketchy, pretty up in the air. The Assyrian Empire at that time is in an alliance with Egypt, and they're both attempting to fend off the rise of the Neo-Babylonian Empire guided by Nabopolassar. Now, this is all happening as Judah is still trying to maintain their southern kingdom. Now, they don't have their independence. This is something where they're already serving as sort of a subservient state to Egypt. Egypt was probably in control of the area, and any of the Judahite kings were sort of under the authority of Egypt, which made things really, really messy. But we have this moment in this geopolitical landscape of the 7th century that's really messy. And this potentially could have been the moment when Habakkuk is writing. Syria's on the decline, Babylon is on the rise, Babylon eventually destroys Assyria and Egypt. There's unrest in Judah because their king, Josiah, was killed by the Egyptian ruler at the time, according to 2 Kings. And we have all this unrest that's happening. So when Habakkuk shows up and says violence and says the Torah is ineffective and justice is not being served, he might be talking about Assyrian suppression of the people. He might be talking about Egyptian suppression and oppression of the people, or he might be talking about Babylon and what's going to happen. We don't really know, but there's this hypothetical moment where we have all these world powers that are vying for authority and sort of, in a sense, ownership of Judah and the kingdom there, which is leading Habakkuk to say these things. Now, in the Qumran community, which a lot of scholars think are probably the originators of the Dead Sea Scrolls, perhaps you've heard of those. These are actually some of our earliest manuscripts of the Old Testament that we have been preserved from the Qumran community and the Dead Sea Scrolls there, which the story of their finding, Google that. It is wild. But anyway, it's this community that's living out in the desert that are attempting to be pure and attempting to live out their faith and their commitments to Yahweh in a very distinct way apart from everyone else. This is an ascetic community, and they're writing scripture, and they're attempting to write texts that will help them to live. And now what they do with the book of Habakkuk is interesting. This is the Pesher of Habakkuk, which is a type of literature. It's an interpretation of the biblical book of Habakkuk. And what they do with this is, because the situation in the prophetic book is sort of ambiguous, it doesn't say what's happening. We're just trying to piece it together and think about timelines. So we think about, the death of Ashurbanipal and the rise of Nabopolassar and the decline of Assyria and the rise of Babylon and all these sorts of things that might be serving as this moment for Habakkuk. But what the Qumran community does is they specify the agents of injustice not as Assyria and Babylon, because at the time when they were writing, those empires had come and gone. Nobody cared about them anymore. So for them just to be reading this old dusty story about an empire that had been destroyed, it wouldn't be relevant. So they update the text, they interpret the text, and they specify the source of the oppression as Rome. Now, this is really interesting because what we have is a community who are really concerned with holiness, that really care about the sacred text that they have, really care about its accurate reproduction and copying and all these sorts of issues. But what they're doing with it is they are interpreting it for their moment in history, and they don't believe that that is something that should not be done. You follow? Now, what makes this even more interesting is this is sort of the fancy word, hermeneutical framework. This is sort of the way that people read the Bible leading up to and in the midst of the time of Jesus and the New Testament authors. In other words, the way that they read the Bible was very, very different than the way that we read the Bible today. And I find this fascinating because when we can tap into how these ancient communities are reading the Bible, it helps us to make sense of what Jesus and Paul and other New Testament authors do with the Old Testament that for us makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever. It's because the way in which they are reading the Bible and the lenses through which they are interpreting the Bible and the commitments that they have about the Bible are so radically different from ours that when we see Paul sort of abusing an Old Testament text to get to his intended reading or his intended conclusion or his intended goal, that is Jesus is the fulfillment of this Old Testament, by using a text that has absolutely nothing to do with Jesus whatsoever, and we think, gosh, Paul, that is some tortured mess. That's what was happening. This is also why we have Jesus sort of at times quoting these verses to prove his point. And for us, we say, well, that passage really doesn't have anything to do with what you're trying to prove, Jesus. But yet the people in the story, they applaud Jesus and say, that's a good reading, because the way that they approached the Bible was so radically different than the way that we approach the Bible. I don't know what to do with that, other than to say, sometimes we think that we know what we're talking about, and we certainly privilege our moment in time as the best moment in time, and our treatment of the Bible as the best treatment of the Bible and the most informed treatment of the Bible. But at times, we sort of force the Bible and the interpreters of the Bible to act like us. And they aren't. And sometimes that includes Jesus and Paul and other New Testament authors who are doing really funky stuff with the Bible. So, when you're reading, remember, this is a moment in time, and the presuppositions that these folks have about their sacred text, they are very different than ours. And I think sometimes that will help us understand the moves that are being made by Jesus and Paul and the New Testament authors when they are reading the Old Testament.